A very good afternoon and a warm welcome to everyone who has joined us today on this virtual platform. We are on day one of the Livelihoods India Summit 2021, and we are starting up with the technical sessions for the day. We'll be having the track 3 discussions. Track 3 today is on jobs in the post-pandemic era, and the session named that you are attending is Skill Gaps in Youth Employment. This session is being co-curated in partnership with Grameen Foundation India. We know that as per the latest data that is coming in is from August 2021, the unemployment rate for people below the age of 30 years stands at 32%, which means that almost every third young Indian is today unemployed. We have nearly 500 million people of working age in India, which is one of the largest workforces in the world. Yet we lag behind when it comes to skilled workforce and looking at strategies for bridging the skills gap between aspiring youth and the market landscape in India. However, the problem of youth unemployment is complex, structural, and multidimensional. And we look forward to this session to throw up some answers to these challenging questions. We hope most of you were around for the introductory session that Mr. Prabhat Labh had introduced. If you're not, he will give an introduction again, I'm sure. It is my pleasure to invite the panelists for this session. Our panelists today include Mr. B.S. Nagesh, founder, TRAIN, Trust for Retailers and Retail Associates of India. Nikita Bengani, Director, Youth Program, Quest Alliance, and Vivek Verma, co-founder and designated partner of the IIIT Seed Fund. It is also my pleasure to invite Mr. Prabhat Labh, CEO, Grameen Foundation, to be the moderator for the session. Mr. Prabhat Labh has 25 years experience in leading social impact organizations and programs across Asia, Africa, and North Africa. As CEO of Grameen's program portfolio in the domains of agriculture, women's economic empowerment, and health and nutrition besides financial inclusion. Mr. Prabhat Labh, the floor is now yours.
Thank you, Mayuk, and good afternoon, everyone. It's a wonderful experience to have this, illustrious, and very experienced set of panelists with us for this discussion. Of course, the issue of jobs, employment, and livelihood is something, which is on top of our minds every single day. And, this panelists that we have here, Mr. Nagesh, Mr. Vivek, and Ms. Nikita, have been working on this issue, passionately and with, using all of different, innovative ideas and creativity, for a long time. So in this, session, we look forward to hearing from your experience and your learnings and, some of the ideas that we can take home. Before we actually dive into the panel discussion itself, Mayuk, if we can pull up the first question that we had for the audience to conduct an audience poll to see, to do a pulse check of where does the audience stand. And the first question for the audience is, over the next 10 years, what is your prediction about youth employment in India? And the three options are: youth unemployment percentage will increase. The second option is youth employment percentage will increase, but wages will remain stagnant. And option C is youth employment percentage will increase with real increase in wages. So if you can click on the response that you align most with, and taking a next 10-year kind of time frame, that will give us some cue to our panelists to think about that. While the organizers kind of compile the audience poll results, let's get into this discussion. And of course, the issue of jobs, employment, livelihoods is something we all feel so passionately about. In last many years, we have been talking about kind of a stagnation, or degrowth in not degrowth, but stagnation coming in the economic growth rate, or falling GDP growth rate numbers even before the pandemic happened. And then the pandemic happened. We have had a highest ever, GDP, real fall in GDP, and then also, highest ever unemployment, rate recorded. And those trends have been kind of, recovering. In addition to the unemployment at the aggregate level, we have an even bigger problem of youth unemployment. So unemployment amongst young people, say below the age of 29, is much higher compared to unemployment rates in general. So I would like to ask this question, and perhaps for this question, I would like to first go to Nikita, and perhaps after that to Vivek, about what do you think are the real causes for this, unemployment in general and youth unemployment in particular, and what kind of systemic changes are required to address this, and how your organizations are addressing this issue. We have the results of the poll, I think, with us. So before you start on your response, I'll just share the results with you. So 38% people have voted for second option, which is youth employment will increase, but wages will remain stagnant. And first and third option have received equal votes of around 30% each. So first option was youth unemployment percentage will increase. 30.77% people are saying that youth unemployment percent will increase, and 30% people are saying youth employment percentage will increase with a real increase in wages. So almost like equally divided between three options. So everybody can choose what you would like to believe in, and build a story upon that. So thank you. Over to you, Nikita.
Thanks. Thank you, Prabhat, and really honored to be part of this panel along with all the esteemed panelists here. Yes, Prabhat, like you said, I think the results are very interesting, and just the fact that all three responses have kind of received equal percentage. I think everyone's still wondering what trends are we going to follow through as we move along, because I think there has been a massive increase in unemployment, and COVID has obviously not made it any easier in the past 2 years for us. And as we're recovering slowly from the pandemic, I think with the way the future of work is evolving, I think all of us are still trying to make meaning of, whether the kind of the way in which the economy will evolve and the future of work will evolve, are we actually equipped as a country to respond to it meaningfully, and hence which way the employment rates will turn is yet for all of us to see. But I also do believe, the fact that the employment rates are likely to go higher while wages might remain stagnant, because I'm not sure if we'll be able to respond as quickly to the kind of opportunities that might get generated. And building on that, I feel like there could be, largely 4 reasons why unemployment rates continue to be high and employment remains low. I think there are 4 sort of barriers I would like to talk about here. One, I think there is a huge amount of skill gap. All of us have been talking about it. The kind of skills the industries are looking for with the kind of jobs that are being generated. Our young people are not fully equipped to, respond to those job needs and requirements, because currently our skilling organizations and even the way the industry is skilling young people, it's not fully being able to, catch up with the changes. And these changes are happening very rapidly. Pre-COVID, none of us could imagine that digital will enter our lives in such a massive way, but it has become like that, right? But are the young people being able to get skilled accordingly is definitely, seeing a big gap. The second big barrier remains of that of aspirations. There is definitely an aspiration between what is available and what young people are looking for, and especially the aspirations on the payment side. There are definitely some amount of expectations young people have, but the kind of wages that are available, and especially again to the marginalized youth who are coming into more blue-collar workforce and entry-level workforce, there is a strong amount of mismatch. So even for the kind of jobs that are available, young people are not necessarily interested in taking those up. So there also remains jobs that remain vacant. And there is a statistic that talks about the fact that there are 109 million jobs and vacancies that need to be filled by 2022, but there are not enough takers as well. So that's also a very appalling data at the same time. So the aspiration part remains a big barrier. The third big barrier is on the geographical front, right? Like the states and the regions which are generating jobs, and there are definitely regions and states which are not generating enough jobs because of maybe lack of presence of industries. So just this whole thing of mobility, migration, and local jobs not being created enough, and hence people being only left with an option of self-employment and entrepreneurship, which is again not something that everybody is being able to respond to as quickly. And this problem becomes even worse when it comes to women, right? Like women employability rates apparently look higher, right? They're higher almost by 6% than men employability rate, but women participation is almost half as that of men, right? So when there is a geographical mismatch and women are not being able to migrate because of several other responsibilities and constraints on various fronts, that continues to remain a big barrier. So these are largely sort of the three big barriers. I feel like some of the ways in which the systems would respond to this is to really focus on how do we make the whole skilling spaces more aspirational. And what is the role the government can play in making skilling more aspirational? Right now, no young person aspires to become a welder in a country like India, because that's not something society really is happy about. Neither of the parents are happy about. People take this up as a last resort. While there is a huge amount of requirement and need for these jobs, but people are not willing to take these up because these are not necessarily very aspirational. And there's a huge role industry can play in making this more aspirational. So that's one systemic way in which industry, government could really come together to solve for this problem. I think industry's role in skilling is far more than just placement, right? They need to really work with education institutions, skilling institutions, to make skilling more in line with the demands of the world of work. There's almost a statistic which says 80% of young people are interested in finding internships, but they end up not finding them. Or even if they're interested in finding those, the way the internships are planned, people are not wanting to take those up. Right. So that's again another way in which systems could address some of these issues. I think there is a huge gap on the tech infrastructure in the country. Given the way we are moving, towards more tech-based careers, and every career is almost looking to have elements of tech going forward. If there is, and only 45 to 50% of this country is using internet. So if 50% of the people are off the tech radar, how are they expected to join the world of work, which is evolving in a certain way? And that is where, again, a very important systemic intervention may be required from the government, even from the industries. So as Quest Alliance, some of the areas that we focus on are a few. Like one, we work very closely with skilling organizations, especially the government-led skilling programs, like the industrial training institutions, to see how we can integrate more of, soft skills training into the way young people are trained. And I think all of us are very aware that skilling programs are largely very technical heavy. They don't necessarily focus on skills like critical thinking, problem solving, communication. They don't focus on the fact that the world of work is so ambiguous, and the ability to adapt quickly to the changing world around us becomes more and more critical. We're not focusing on the ability of learning, right? The fact that upskilling is going to become an important way of being for every young person to keep up to the changes. This whole ability to learn itself is a skill that more and more young people need to adopt. So those are aspects that we work on. And related to this, then, we also train our young people on aspects of STEM careers and how do we build STEM mindsets to be in line with future of work. We work massively with the trainers, the leadership within skilling institutions to bring a certain way in which training happens. And we also work closely on working on tech infrastructure in whichever capacity we can as an organization, while I think governments need to take this up at a much larger scale. So yeah, I'll stop here, Prabhat, and hand it over back to you.
Thanks for that, Nikita. Lots of good ideas and good stuff there. There's 2 points I thought I'll follow up with you on, which is you made 2 points about how we can make the industry make the work or job more aspirational. And second point, you was asking how industry can play a larger role in, say, skilling kind of stuff. So I think if you can share some of good examples around that in your partnerships and the work that you are doing, that will be great. If you want to respond to this right now, that's okay. Otherwise, you can also address that in a subsequent round if you want.
I'm okay either with you, Prabhat, if you'd want
to. Please go ahead. Yeah, take 2 minutes through.
Yeah. Okay. So a couple of ways in which, we're trying to engage the industry a lot more. So from our experience of the work that we do, especially with the government ITIs across the country, I feel like, there is a gap on what ITIs train young people on and what finally the skill sets the industries are looking for. And there is a very massive change in which the skills are evolving for the industries. So I feel like this work the industries need to do with the government on co-creating some of the curriculum, and being able to rapidly change it at a pace, which can actually keep pace with what is happening in the world of work outside. That's one. I think creating opportunities for a lot more hands-on practical trainings at the industry shop floors for young people, I think becomes more and more critical, because just learning some of these skills in the classroom doesn't benefit, right? And just sitting and also learning these skills in an ITI kind of a space also is not really helpful. So being able to look at models, and there is a very interesting model that's evolving in the space of ITI, which is called the dual systems of training, where students could actually spend 9 months in a year in the industry as opposed to being in the ITI, and only 3 months they spend on learning theory and basics of everything. So those kinds of models need to be co-created. The industries should equip ITIs and other skilling institutions with more latest machines technology so that learners could really learn. And I feel like just more conversations with young people and bringing them to industries for more exposure is very critical, right? Because otherwise the world of work remains this one very mystical thing in their minds. So opportunities for internship, apprenticeships becomes extremely, extremely critical. So I think those are one aspect. And the other bit is also, I think, being able to clearly lay out some kind of a career path for young people from a growth perspective, and which is what also makes some of these things a lot more aspirational, is where industries could play a lot of the role, right? Because especially young people who come with the degree of being 10th pass, 12th pass, they do hit a glass ceiling after a certain point in time. So how are industries looking at their growth, and what is really the levels they could transcend over the years in their journey is something they could put out as well. So there could be a lot of different ways in which industries could really work more closely with education institutions to bridge this divide as far as possible.
Wonderful. Thanks, Nikita. So Vivek, would you like to now come in at this point? And also, I think the aspect within this question that you can highlight more on is around the job creators, because in skilling we often talk about job seekers, and the work that you have been doing, Vivek, I think there's a lot to do around job creators, entrepreneurship. And also, I was talking about the systemic changes, and you have worked very closely with the system, especially with the government of Telangana. I think if you can talk about some of those experiences, that'll be very helpful. Thanks, Vivek.
Thank you, Prabhat, and wonderful to be here. So good afternoon to all of you. And I must start by the fact that I'm very happy to see the optimism in the response from the people, because between A and C, you've said 60% of people are expecting that youth unemployment percentage will kind of increase. Between B and C, my mistake. So between 38 and 30. So by and large, 68% of the people are optimistic about either the number of employment going up or employment and wages both going up. So it gives me a very good feeling, because I personally believe that that's the real story, in the whole, what I call the co-COVID world. And I'm saying there is no post-COVID world, because we have to learn to live with the virus and the changes the world has seen because of the virus. So it is the co-COVID world. So I'm very optimistic that the viewers are also seeing it that way. Now, coming to your question about, what are the gaps and where are the challenges? I think some of those Nikita already did cover, but I really do want to emphasize on the fact that the industry connect is a very, very important aspect. And I think, from my own experience there, both working as an advisor to the Telangana government and in a few funding opportunities and working with corporates, I think we've seen some really fantastic outcomes that have come out of a closer interaction with the industry. And these outcomes are in multiple areas. One, like Nikita highlighted, is in the industry coming forward to train the workforce for the future. But more importantly, it is to help the educational institutes and the training institutes understand the skills that are required, and what I would typically call the 21st century work skills, which are going beyond just the ordinary, programming skills or engineering skills or management skills. So I think that's an important point, and I just didn't want to miss out on that and re-emphasize that. I think one other thing I feel is to do with the overall larger education system. And I am again very optimistic and happy with the NEP 2020. Hopefully some of those things will start changing. None of this will happen overnight because a large education system like us will take a while for it to really seek and soak the whole new ingrains into them, and it may take a couple of years for a systemic change to happen, but at least the first step has been taken where a lot more practicality is being brought in into the education system. And I'm very happy as a board member at TIE Hyderabad and part of a lot of the global initiatives where we focus on youth, specifically coming to your point earlier about employability more so with the youth. I think it is very important for us to start dealing with them at a very early stage. And coming to your point about entrepreneurship, because most of my work and passion goes towards that. And I think it's important for us to sow the seeds of becoming job creators. And I think the whole concept of entrepreneurship needs to be expanded to a large extent. A lot of us think about entrepreneurship only as startups. And I think that as a mindset change, if we can start working at the youth at a fairly early stage, I think it makes a big difference. From an experiment standpoint, at TIE, we run a program called the TIE Young Entrepreneurs, where we start working with these kids when they are in the 9th grade, 9th, 10th, 11th, and 12th, these 4 grades we work with to turn them into people who understand entrepreneurship better. But surprisingly, even at a Hyderabad chapter, and we have 61 chapters around the world, but in one chapter, we've had 3 commercial entities that have come out of these student entrepreneurs and 2 patents that have come out of these students. So I think if more such initiatives can happen, that will really help. Now, on job creator versus job seeker, I think that is an extremely pertinent point in the new co-COVID world, because geographies are distributed, people are working remotely, technology and infrastructure is such that, gone are the days that you had to set up a large entity in a metro city for you to get more people. You can now create a fragmented workforce who's sitting from different places and working remotely. So I think it is a very critical piece, and a lot of work is being done in this space across the country, across the world. But focusing on youth again within that, it's important to create the right awareness. And it's more about breaking the myth. A lot of times the problem today that we are facing is the societal pressure. Even today on are the parents fully aware of a child who's wanting to take a job creator's role rather than a job seeker's role? And I blame our generation to a large extent for that, because we quite often put too much pressure on the children to say that no, don't waste too much time in these entrepreneurial journeys. You've done your engineering, go find a good job with a multinational company. And I come from Telangana, and we are the largest producers in that sense of engineers who want to finish their engineering, go off to the US, quite often be on bench. But even then, that's considered a far better career choice than trying to solve some problem. But I think other important aspect I want to touch upon is that when we want to create a generation of job creators, it's important that we start teaching these people the ability to spot problems, the ability to creatively create solutions. And unfortunately, currently the system quite often does not help doing that, because a lot of it is still rote learning, where the students are still theoretically understanding various things, but they haven't really found a method to look around them, find problems, and then apply some of this knowledge to finding solutions. And I think that wherever in pockets we have seen that happen, that has demonstrated fantastic results. For example, I can quote an example. In Telangana, we ran a school innovation challenge last year, where we enrolled 25,000 rural school children. And our idea was to help them spot problems around them. So we didn't go with a problem statement and say, solve this problem, because a lot of times, many of us coming from urban environment see the world as a very urban world, and that may not be true. So some of our problems they may not even relate to, because they don't know such a problem. So we let them select the problem around them, build a solution, and it's a year-long program. We worked with them, these 25,000 children, 5,000 teachers who helped them with the concepts of innovation and entrepreneurship. Finally, 25 teams were selected, brought into Hyderabad, showcased to the various departments for which they were building solutions. And many of them became a solution that the government is now adopting to find next level. Some of these students may not be able to take it to the next level, but they are now being guided by other entrepreneurs who are kind of working with them to take it forward. So I think it's very important to go to the grassroots and build the ability of thinking at a problem identification, solution, and then maybe monetization, which is when the job creation can happen when they start scaling. I think the last point I want to make is also, touching upon this wage increase part, which is part of the questions that you raised. And I think that is something we have to understand, that the larger economics have to make sense. And I think that is a little bit of a tricky situation, especially for us, because the whole economic environment, one part of it is the whole pandemic, and that has really impacted most economies around the world, but particularly our economy, because a lot of our migrant labor, a lot of our agriculture, a lot of our other industries have suffered. So it is important that economic change needs to happen, because without that, that's not going to happen. And I think one thing that we as a country need to, and I know it's a bit of a tricky and a touchy topic here, but I think we have to really put economics right at the top of our leadership thinking, not just in the corporate world, not just in the entrepreneurial world, but also in the political world. That we have to, at the end of the day, get to a point where economics have to make sense, and they have to make more sense over and above any other political, legal, regional issues. And I think that is an area where a lot of us will need to put our energy and focus on, to see how do we really see a good economic revival, because without that, sustainability will be a question mark. If any enterprise tries to take the wage up, it will not make sense. So I think it is an important aspect. So with that, I'll hold, but I will once again say that I'm very happy with the optimism that I'm seeing from the audience. And I personally believe that, I think, like the Y2K moment, which changed India only in the IT sector, I think the co-COVID world can do the same across sectors, because like you rightly said, phygital world is for us to capture, and this is our opportunity to really make a difference. Is it going to be easy? Most certainly not. But is it doable? Is the opportunity real? I certainly think so. Back to you, Prabhat.
Thanks, Vivek, for those very, very thoughtful and also optimistic view, which I also kind of carry that optimism. And experience has told us that every time we or the humanity faces an adversity, we come back with our grit, with our determination, with resilience, and with our innovation to kind of do better in future. And as we can see, the lockdowns happened. Suddenly, there were thousands of these women or self-help groups kind of started making masks and sanitizers, and banks were inaccessible. Business correspondents kind of became active. So I think and there's lots of other things happening in sector after sector. Use of digital tools in education and learning, use of digital health platforms, which we had not thought like 2 years ago that suddenly there will be so much demand for health, digital health kind of initiatives. So absolutely, I think a lot can happen in future, and very, very good to heartening to see that optimism both in the audience as well as in your views. Before we move to Nagesh, let's go back to our audience once again and see what their opinion is. So a second audience poll question is coming up for you, you in the audience. The question is, Mayuk, if you can pull up the question on the screen. for the second audience poll, which is India runs the largest skilling programs in the world, yet we have a persistent problem of gap between skill level of job seekers and skill requirement of employers. What is the biggest reason for this skill gap? Options are skill requirement of the industry is changing very fast. The second option is skilling programs are outdated. The third option is skill development organizations are not doing a good job of running skill development programs. And the fourth option is youth are not interested in skilling programs. So please share your responses, which will give us some food for thought and for discussion. While we wait for the audience poll, I would like to move with our panelists for our next question. So, our economy is undergoing a massive structural shift, and that's a long-term secular trend, right? From agriculture to services sector, phenomena of urbanization, digitalization, globalization, whatever. Consumerism is there, So how, organizations working on skilling and youth employment and entrepreneurship can leverage these massive opportunities that is being created now. So Nagesh, I think, if you can, touch upon this question. And after that, perhaps, either Nikita or Vivek, whoever wants to kind of add additional remarks, that would be great. And also while responding to this question, because I talked about those haunting images of the migrants walking back home last year, millions of them. Also, if you can consider aspect of, migration, what needs to change in a post-pandemic world, with regard to, these, how these opportunities can be leveraged. So Nagesh, over to you.
Thank you, Prabhat.
Let me see if the poll results are here. Not yet. Okay, once it comes, I'll share the results. Please continue.
Thank you, Prabhat, for this opportunity. And I just want to go back first to really define the topic of youth. Yeah, because we are talking of youth at a very, very high level. In my opinion, we can't sweep the youth skilling or youth employment at that level. To me, a youth is a poor youth and not so poor youth. Okay, it totally changes the way things happen. There's an uneducated youth and an educated youth. Again, it totally changes from where they are. A youth coming from tier 1 cities, maybe chores or maybe poor areas, okay, and a youth coming from 3-4 or from rural areas. I think these three totally change the dynamics of skilling. So I'm just getting at the definition to say one sweeping youth is not the right solution going forward because of the diversity of India. The second important question is this whole skilling. And I know when NSDC started, they must have spent a few $1 billion. See, skilling for what? I think that's very, very important. So I like this session where we're talking of livelihoods for India. Because unless you are not planning to provide livelihoods, okay, when you're talking of skilling, not only the youth, but also the parent, the society, kya padh rahe ho? Padhne ke baad kya karoge? That question is not answered. Okay, and I have seen situations where padhne ke baad, I have met people who said, padhaya likha hai, usko abhi yo delivery boy banana hai. So these are questions that we have to really answer. So if we actually work back, and I like the optimism of the audience to say 68% will get jobs. Okay, I'm not sure whether you'll get jobs where your income will keep rising, because there's also an economic statement that Vivek spoke about. But if we are able to really say you are studying to do this, because today engineers also are unemployable, there are graduates who are unemployable, and we have 10th and 12th who are struggling. In fact, day before yesterday, I was talking to a small retailer, okay, and I said, how do you get people? He said, the modern retailers say 12th pass students, youth required. He says, we write 10th fail youth required. And he says, we get a lot of people. Look at the way you're anti-success in terms of you're saying, agar padh lik ke aage badhoge to shayad mushkil hai, lekin agar padh lik ke fail ho jaoge to hamare paas job hai. Yeah. So I think we have to really say skilling for what. So if you work on livelihood and work back, I think the possibilities are very, very high. The last thing I think is also about socially accepted jobs. And like you were saying that, would you want to make your son a driver or a mechanic? Okay, and industry can do a lot of work, but more than industry, I think the government can do a lot of work. They're spending a lot of money for lots of things on advertising and things like that. When NSDC started, there was a statement that was made. It said, "Hunar hai to qadar hai." I thought that was a fantastic statement. And I think if the government spends 1,000 crores on just this statement, to say there is pride in what you do. And look at what Ola did. Okay, we don't realize. I mean, we all have had drivers. Okay, did our drivers in their normal life get the same respect that an Ola driver? You are sitting in a black and yellow taxi. How many times did you get into conversation with a black and yellow taxi driver? Today you sit in an Ola and you start talking to him, and you are sometimes conversing with a very intelligent and a very aspirational youth sitting in the car. So we'll have to look at this whole skilling and livelihood from very, 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 very different angle. Yeah. Now come to the economic part of it. When you have a $2,000 per capita, okay, assumption by average is there are 50% people below $2,000. When you have $150 earning in a family, okay, the chances of education, the chances of being migration, the chances of development drastically comes down. So we'll have to think for this set of people very differently. Okay, but I think we are still far away. We are hopeful, we are very positive, but far away. Let me come to the urban or $2,000 and above. You saw today morning statement that 500,000 people are brain draining out of this country, and $30.67 billion is going into fees being paid outside. Okay, so that's we are talking of the top end of the spectrum of youth where they are going. It is the middle end. On the middle end, let's look at the kind of businesses that have got created in this country in the last 5 years. Okay, one is very, very clearly, Nikita knows it probably the best, is the last mile. Okay, last mile is growing, like millions of jobs are coming in, but last mile is also driven by cash burn of the new capital which is coming into the country. But on the other hand, if you look at it, the hierarchies are collapsing in industry because of technology. See, in brick and mortar retail, for every 10 you would have one supervisor, for every 100 you will have 10 supervisors and 4 department managers, 1 store manager. Okay, today you don't require this middle level in order to really build an organization, because technology can manage 1,000 people at the same time. Controls and compliances can be built in. Yeah. So in a situation like this, if you're creating last mile job, but there are no hierarchies, growth is a serious challenge. Yeah. The other important thing is that they are gig workers, which means that even if they're employed, they look like employees, but they're gig workers, they're self-employed. So they do not have gainful employment for 8 hours or 10 hours. So there is a challenge which the industry has to look at it. And we talk about saying why the industry is not training. Industry is not training because they're not part of their whole employment. Industry is also not training because of no permanency. You don't know how long this youth will stay. And the youth doesn't want to stay because he's not able to see growth. So challenges of business are quite a lot currently. So this is one kind of job, and these are millions of jobs. Other kind of jobs that are getting created, which is on the tech end, the back end, I think there is fantastic opportunity. But there also what's happening is the jobs that are getting created are very, very engineering and tech jobs. If you look at a head office of a corporation 5 years back, and you look at a head office of a corporation today, and if both companies had only 1,000 people, it's very likely that the 1,000 people, out of that 900 will be engineers. Yeah. And the last part, which most service industries really created very good jobs for on customer service. So earlier, there were people to serve the customer. Today, we have moved away from customer being served to customer being self-served. And that job was a job which people who are working in retail or last mile would graduate into. They will start at an associate level, they will graduate into customer service because they have learned social skills and things like that. That's gone. Because half the time today bank teller charges you if you ask money from him. Okay, today you call up somebody and ask for any service. By the time you get the service, you're pressed 1, 2, 3, 4, 8, 9, 10 times. Yeah. So these are things which are actually creating a challenge. So I would say, what is the opportunity? Opportunity is this China one that is happening. Opportunity is the PLI scheme that is happening, because a lot of jobs are likely to get created in manufacturing. And the good part of it is these jobs are likely to be created in tier 2, tier 4, where land is required. Because each one of these is coming and asking for 500 acres, 1,000 acres, 2,000 acres. And land are probably available in tier 2, tier 3, tier 4 cities. So I'm very, very positive about what this has done. But for this kind of jobs, you can't have a 10th or a 12th fail who has just done his basics. Okay, so he has to be skilled to get the job at the age of 18 or 21. So again, I'm going back. If today PLI is what is done, today government says $10 billion for chip making, then maybe we have to have maybe 100,000 youth who are trained to join those chip making factories, because you can't training them after they come in. So maybe companies like Quest, maybe other skilling institutes have to work reverse engineering and say, If 24 months down the line there's a factory, can we actually understand what they want, what kind of youth, and then go and talk to them about it? So hunar hai to qadar hai. You have to say, hum phone ka chips bana rahe hain, not potato chips, aur uske liye aisa job chahiye, come and join. So that is, I think, the big opportunity. Otherwise, there is a serious challenge. The bottom of the pyramid is not going to grow. And to be very honest, I don't agree to the audience in terms of wage growth, because what I have seen in the service industry is, due to technology and due to phygital, online and offline, the number of employees required to serve the customer has come down by 40%. Okay, and if you talk of retail as an industry, 46 million people work in retail. 90% is in traditional retailers. Now, traditional retailers are getting an onslaught because there's no support. We have a farm loan, farm waiver loan. We don't have a Kirana loan or Kirana waiver loan. So those guys are not being able to grow because of the kind of things happening digitally. So therefore, the jobs that are locally available to them, 12 million Kiranas having almost 40 million people, if they don't exist, some industries, Mark says that we've had 10 to 12% closures. Even the local jobs in tier 2, tier 3, tier 4 rural will not happen. So there's a lot of work to be done, but I would say we should get away from macro words, macro work, and get into micro work at every city level, work at the industry level, vertical level. I think there's a lot of hope.
Thank you, Nagesh. Vivek, any additional input on this? Fantastic points that Nagesh brought out. I mean, especially Nagesh talked about the opportunities coming from tier 3, tier 4 kind of cities. And you are passionate about that, that aspect of migration and the need to create jobs where people live rather than need to migrate somewhere else. And anything else that you want to talk about in terms of these new opportunities that are being created?
Sure. So I like the points Nagesh made, and I'm kind of going back to the analogy of how do you eat an elephant, and it is bite by bite, and how do we solve this problem? It has to be something that we do in small bits. I don't think a macro solution is available and one size fits all kind of a solution exists. So I certainly like the point Nagesh made, and I'd like to add here saying that if we are, and it is beginning to happen today, how do you slice the whole opportunity into segments? How do you bring youth? How do you bring women? How do you bring persons with disability? How do you bring LGBTQ community? How do you bring separate communities to bring that in and look at what kind of opportunities exist for each of these people specifically? And I think that is where the differentiation will lie as we go forward. And I know many platforms who've already started doing work in each of these specific areas. So I think that just to add to what Nagesh mentioned, I think that is going to happen. The other thing which is very, very important is this whole geographical spread of the jobs, and I think the co-COVID world is full of a fragmented workforce. I don't think we are going to have the situation of the migration to the extent that existed ever in future. And while I understand the point Nagesh made, it'll mean that there will be a change of the profile of the work that may happen. The jobs that existed in the past for that 12% of the outlets which have got closed, and when I say outlets, I mean the Kirana stores and things like that. Now there will be new opportunities that will need to get created. And I think a lot of the aspirational youth are now looking at opportunities that can get created either in their village, which quite often may be a pipe dream, but at least in a tier 2, tier 3 town close to them, rather than going to a metro, which may be 500 thousands of kilometers away, because they have, in a certain sense, got disillusioned with the fact that, a lot of times the dignity of this employee is battered so badly when they go to through a migration to an urban center. So I think the challenge that we will as an industry have to focus on is to see how do we help create jobs closer to the youth, and how do we create jobs which are closer to the skill sets that we train them on. Because there's no point in us going to a rural place and then talking about some fancy skills that we require, because we know for a fact that we will have the same challenge of unemployed youth and nobody available for good quality jobs, because that gap of skilling has not been. And I also think that whole point that Nagesh made is something I also hold the view that quite often the skilling initiatives, and you know, sometimes it may sound as if we are being very critical of the moves from the government, but I think a lot of times the skilling is being done in a very theoretical manner, or it's not keeping pace with the world of tomorrow. A lot of our skilling initiatives are still looking at yesterday, not even today. Whereas the skilling initiatives we need to focus on are for tomorrow. Even today is not good enough, because by the time the people who complete their skilling initiative and go out, the competition is such that they need something more than what they learned. So it has to be keeping in mind something which is more future oriented, so that 21st century skills, or where is the industry headed, which are the sunrise industries that are going to come, and how are we training our not just youth, but youth, women, LGBT, people with disability. How do we make it inclusive, and how do we make it future proof, is where I think the skilling needs to focus on. And I'm not sure that can be done just by somebody like an NSDC. I think it will require, in addition to an NSDC, a lot of industry association, a lot of industry engagement, because they are the ones who can come and say that, you know, this is what I require, and if this skilling can happen, then I'm willing to absorb 40,000 people, or I'm willing to absorb, and I'm talking at an industry level, not at an organization level. You know, if let's say people like Nagesh who come from a retail sector, if they were to come and say, these are the skills that the new generation retail sector requires, and if we can get this workforce ready, then the retail sector is ready to absorb whatever, 50,000, 100,000 people. And similarly in other areas, then I think the skilling will become more meaningful. Youth will be attracted to come to that skilling because they know the chance of them getting employability at the end of that skilling is useful. Otherwise, it's just a certificate I hang on the wall, and I'm not sure, because that Kirana fellow doesn't accept my certificate. You know, at the end of the day, as they say, the money is where the difference lies. So that would be my view on this view, that it has to become inclusive and it has to become diverse. So it has to be in that manner where it can become meaningful. Back to you, Prabhat.
Thanks, Vivek. In fact, you know, your comments reminded me of, you know, I was watching an interview by, you know, KV Kamath, for example, who really transformed, you know, ICICI Bank, you know, one of the biggest success stories about, you know, private sector banking in India. And he was saying that, you know, as ICICI Bank was kind of growing, we really needed, you know, people to become branch managers, and that talent just simply did not exist. So what did we do? We set up our own, training college. So we would hire people from different places. We know that they don't know banking, and we would, you know, train them for 6 months, 1 year, and then they would come and, you know, work for ICICI Bank. Similar story we find, you know, in the IT sector, you know, TCS and Infosys. They just go to campuses and hire anybody who is having, you know, any kind of engineer. You may have done civil engineering, mechanical engineering, or whatever, may know nothing about coding, and yet they would hire you if you have that basic level of intelligence. Then they would train you for a year, and then, you know, they'll get what they want out of it. So that kind of, you know, takes me to my next question for the audience before I come back to my panelists. So audience, get ready for your next audience question. Mayuk, if you can, you know, pull out the next audience poll, which is about, in your opinion, what is the best approach to bridge the skill gap? Option A, that skilling organizations should continuously revamp their curriculum. Option B, instead of separate skilling organizations, academic, technical, and vocational education and training institutions should run all the skilling programs. And third option is that skilling programs should be run by the industry and not by the separate skilling organizations. So if you can have your response, from the audience, that will be really helpful. Thank you so much so far for, you know, being engaged and responding to our questions. We'll be coming back to you often, and that gives us some cues for provokes our thoughts for discussion. Thank you. As we wait for the results of the audience poll to come in. So, you know, one thing that has really excited me in the last 18 months is the amount of interest, you know, being generated by anything to do with tech and digital platforms. You have seen massive amount of money is going into ed tech sector, for example, education technology, right? Byju's, and a number of others, Udemy, edX, and so many others. Health tech platforms, agri-tech platforms, fintech platforms. And so you have, Zomato going public and, raising, now valued at over 1 lakh crores. Zomato may directly only employ maybe 3,000 or 5,000 people, but indirectly it has like 3 lakh, delivery partners, right, who are self-employed people. So, all these opportunities and jobs are being created. How are we preparing our youth to leverage these new employment or self-employment or entrepreneurship opportunities, given that we have a fairly conducive environment now? The government is coming with so many SOPs and PLI scheme and others. Investors are willing to kind of back up anybody who wants to do anything and has a credible plan. So that will be helpful. And also, if you can think about how financing can play an important role in job creation. What kind of innovations are required in financing of enterprises? Like maybe does things like micro equity kind of solutions are required, not just microfinancing, right? Because the risk appetite of microfinance versus equity is different. Do we need more risk capital or do we need new kind of models like pay for performance or and development impact bonds or whatever, employment bonds? So let me see. We have the audience poll results now. Let me just share the results with you, and then we'll go back to this question. So the responses are: skilling organizations should continuously revamp their curriculum, 15.79%, so 16%. Instead of separate skilling organizations, academic, technical, and vocational education and training institutions should run all the skilling programs, that is 26%. And 57.8%, so almost 58% people are saying skilling programs should be run by the industry and not by separate skilling organizations. So overwhelming kind of majority over there. So just some inputs from the audience for your thoughts. So for my question, I don't know, who would like to take this question around new opportunities and financing? Nikita, you, Vivek?
I can speak about some of these things, maybe financing. Sorry, Nagesh, if you want to go ahead first.
Yeah. So Prabhat, I think a very interesting a story I want to share at this point of time, which probably goes with what the audience said. I met a big fashion brand in US 10 years back. And he had a very unique model. If he required 10 people, he would take 100 people and he would spend 3 months money, boarding, lodging on them and train them. And at the end of training, he will do the job interviews. And then he'll select 10. The training was so good, the other 90 got a job just outside the door of the training institute because the competitors were waiting. And in the process, he created job for 10 and the 90. But the 10 that joined him, okay, those 10 remained for long and they were real productive youth. So I would go with the audience, okay? But the question is that today industry's patience and the speed and scale and size of organizations to be created is so fast that you can't plan things like this from day one. It has to be planned from day -5, day -10, okay? And there are industries which can afford to do this. There are industries which cannot afford to do it, but fortunately, with the kind of capital coming into this kind of growth industry, this is definitely a positive. If the government can add a metal to it and say that people who are preparing youth for jobs, okay, if they take 25% in their business, they get X. But if they are able to prepare another 75, go to somewhere else, maybe they get 50% of X. Okay, those incentives can really make a difference. But I fully agree that training and skilling youth by the industry will give you much better response, because then you will also do internship and you'll do rest of the things. Yeah. But then you have to be very careful, because sometimes our laws of labor laws, our provident fund laws, the ESIS laws, all those things also start playing into it. And you are wanting to commit to development and you get committed to compliance. Okay. And you have some serious challenges there.
Thank you, Nagesh.
Yeah. But if I could come on.
Sure, Nikita.
Yeah, so I just wanted to add, another perspective to this question that you just asked the audience, right? Like about who should be running the skilling programs actually. And I kind of agree, like, the way this discussion is going, it definitely sounds like the industry connect needs to be very, needs to be a strong focus of skilling. And that's when the bridge between the skills and jobs divide that exists will reduce. But the other, side which I would like us to draw attention to is the fact that, there is two sides to this whole process. There's a demand side and there's a supply side. And oftentimes when, the skilling programs are run only by the industry, it's very heavily driven only from the demand lens, right? The fact that there are young people and they do have certain aspirations. And, and how much of those things are also being taken into consideration sometimes becomes a very, it's not necessarily a big focus in that situation. And how I want to sort of, emphasize on this further is the fact that, we as young people, when we are as part of our growing up and even as part of our education processes, we're not necessarily made to think, with our own mind. It's always like teacher told me so, and hence I'm doing this, or parents told me so, and hence I'm doing this. So from just that perspective, right, the fact that how many of the young people actually know what they want to do in life, and where is this opportunity and the exploration that's coming to them, that, what do I really want to do? And is there a process as part of our skilling trainings or even as part of our education, which is really making them think about the fact that who am I, what is my calling, what are my interests, abilities, aspirations, what am I good at, what do I really like to do, as one set of exploration. If you look at them understanding what are the opportunities and the possibilities out there in the world of work, they probably don't even know, right? Half of the times, the young people who land up in certain skilling institutions or even in certain jobs for that matter is not necessarily always fully thought through, right? So it's a very by chance kind of a thing. And then, you landing in a job which you're not necessarily happy with, you realizing it after some time. And then you see this whole phenomena around attrition also playing out very regularly, right? So for me, what I wanted to just bring, to this conversation is also the fact that one of the ways in which we can prepare our young people better is to have a more concerted career development kind of a program as part of education, which includes one, exploration of self, exploration of the world of work, them having an ability to actually explore various careers, various jobs, and then make a decision that this is where my calling lies, and hence this is where I want to make a career. And then, yes, they should, maybe land up in an institution that different industries are running, but with the certain assurance that, yeah, this is where I want to be. Otherwise, you also tend to get boxed, and you see a huge amount of dissonance in young people. 80% of the people you speak to about, are you happy in the job that you're doing? They probably say no, right? And everybody is constantly looking for a shift. And this phenomenon is even much stronger when it comes to young people. So that's the part I want to highlight. And I think doing so will also put some onus on young people, right? Right now we talk about government, we talk about industries, but where is the onus on young people about the fact that, how am I wanting to drive my career growth and journey? And that will come from the fact that if you were to make them self-learners, and when I say self-learning, it's coming from the point of view that where is my agency and how am I working on that aspect where I'm able to take control of my life, my journey. And I have an ability to think about the fact that, where do I want to go with things? And it again starts with agency in your everyday, how my decisions are being made, who's making decisions for me, how am I learning in a school or a college, and where is my agency in deciding what do I want to learn, who do I want to learn with, whether do I want to learn a particular subject where I see value in, because we don't, really push forward this whole idea of agency in young people. They are not being able to make decisions which are very thoughtfully theirs, right? And today, honestly, the information economy really has, cut these boundaries of learning happening only in classroom. Learning is actually happening everywhere, half the time on the internet for every young person. But despite of all of this information, knowledge available to them, they're not being able to make the right choices, right? So that's where I feel like the focus of building agency for young people, bringing the self-learning mindsets, where they're also being able to take some amount of ownership of how some of these jobs are evolving and where they want to really go, becomes really, really critical, and really hold the process of their own socioeconomic growth, I feel, so that's one aspect I wanted to bring in. And just one more thing I wanted to touch upon, right? When you spoke about the fact that everything almost has an E added to it, whether you talk about e-agriculture or e-commerce or e-tail or, e-banking and all of these things. I feel like just this whole narrative around the fact that there is no more careers in technology, it's almost become technology in careers, right? Every career is meant to have a component of technology, and hence technology is almost evolving in some sense, like digital literacy and maybe to some extent digital fluency is almost evolving as a life skill today for everybody to have, to be able to make sense of how careers are having technology being integrated. And it's no more going to be a choice, right? And for that to happen, I think, again, the education institutions, again, the skilling institutions or even the trainings done by industry really need to have a strong component of how we're making young people digitally literate, how we're making young people digitally fluent, and how there is a strong tech infrastructure available in the country. Because again, and this problem becomes much and much more massive when it comes to women, right? Half of them can't even participate in labor force because they don't even own a mobile phone, let alone anything else, right? So if you don't have a mobile phone, how do you sort of talk about technology-led careers or careers in technology in any which way? So in some sense, like these are definitely going to be critical and important focus for skilling institutions, for governments, for industry to be able to have a focus on that. How are we preparing young people on digital literacy, digital fluency, and this whole self-learning mindset for them to be able to, really ride this wave that is coming up with the future of work.
Thanks, Nikita. I also, have a slight counter view on that, and I'll just share that, and then I'll go to Vivek, which is that, and that is, coming absolutely from my own personal experience, whereby, after doing my post-graduation, it took me 7 years to figure out what is it that I really want to do. And allowing myself that serendipitous journey of 7 years actually helped me explore, more things than I could have if I was clear on day one about what I really want to do. But I also realized that, of course, the young people that I meet today, and the generation is, of course, much more savvy, much more aware, much more connected to source of information. So perhaps there may not be that need for that serendipitous journey, and having that clarity at the outset may actually be helpful. Just want to make that remark. Vivek, over to you.
Yep. Thank you. And I think, as I'm reminded of the saying that it takes a village to raise a child. And I think here's a classic case here that, this whole challenge of unemployability, and I'm very excited about the response that we got. 58% of people feel, and I think I agree with that, that these are people who understand, like I made a point earlier, that what am I going to require today, tomorrow, and day after? And can I bring that? And I think it is an important point, like Nagesh said earlier, that we have to get the industry to be able to articulate the needs of tomorrow, because this is not something I can wake up today and say, okay, I need these people. We need to give the institutes the time to train people. So which means I need to plan a way ahead. But I think here's where two points that I want to make. One, Nagesh already touched upon, that there is a need for the government to come in and play a role on two parts. One is the statutory part, that how are they going to look at this whole temporary training workforce, and how do we regulate them? Because these cannot be regulated and treated like regular employees. And hence all the minimum wages, provident fund, ESIC, all of this need to evolve, because otherwise the corporates are going to, or the companies are going to look at this as a huge burden. And hence I don't want to do it. I'd rather do some placement from somebody else who takes the headache of training people. So I think that is one. And the second part is that if this is such a big problem for us as a nation and for the industry, then what financial incentives and what financial modeling can we do which will help people to come forward and really put the best foot forward? Now, is there a way for us to create a incentivization model where if a corporate is doing a model similar to what Nagesh described, you're training 100 people, you may absorb 10 people, but you have done a benefit to the larger ecosystem by those 90 people who are going out and getting trained. Now, is there some benefit, ideally financial, but if it's non-financial too, some benefit that I can accrue to my organization, then that will be a good enough incentive for a lot more people to get involved. So I think that is one part of it, which is how can governments play a role here. And I think more important is to build a model of an ecosystem. I don't think this is a problem any one of the elements of the ecosystem can solve by themselves. So if we say the industry alone can solve it, I don't think it will happen. If we say the training institutes can solve this, I don't think that will happen. If we look at education system by assembly, will that happen? I don't think so. So it will need a collaborative approach. And I think that is where a lot of effort I feel should go in, where, and ideally this should be done by the skilling organizations, but I'm not sure how well that model is working today. And I think that model needs to evolve, where people come together. So there is a technology element to it, there is a financing element to it, there is an industry element to it, there is an education element to it, and then there is a political element to it. So how do we bring, because unless and until it's a well-oiled machinery where all of these parts are working well together, I think this problem is going to become even more difficult to solve. Now, is this utopia that I'm talking about, of all of these people coming together? In a certain sense, yes, it is. And, at the way it is looking today, but I think some path breaking will need to happen in that space, because this problem, in my view, again, if you look at it as a nation, as an economy, is the biggest problem plaguing us today. And there are multiple dimensions to this problem. The whole top elite immigration out of India is part of that problem. The fact that you have a lot of people who at the bottom of the pyramid are not finding anything, and hence getting into depression, getting into mental issues, even going to the extent of committing suicide at the extreme. The two extremes are that, but the majority of people, even in the middle, are living a very dissatisfied life. And that is largely because they have not got any guidance, or they don't see the opportunity. So I think the need for industry collaborative effort, where we bring everyone who has a role to play to have a seat in that discussion, and then it becomes a roundtable of solution. I think that is the approach I would think is needed. So it is not industry per se. So I would say that interpretation of that 58% burden to be taken by the industry, I think if it is a collaborative body which the industry can probably take leadership on, but bring the other stakeholders. So it is not the entire burden on the industry, because at the end of the day, the only business of a business is to do business. And an enterprise is going to come back and say, look, I'm not here for a social purpose. So I'm happy to do, using Nagesh's example, train those 10 people, but I'm not here going to be spending money on the other 90 people unless and until I see some long-term incentive or benefit. So I think that would be my view on this, that, government has a role to play. And I think the rest of it is a very good collaborative effort, industry leading it from the front, but others playing an equally important and committed role. So each of the other stakeholders have to be committed to this, is what I feel.
Thanks, Vivek. Nagesh, any additional inputs on this?
I have a question which could be an input, and this question is to you, Prabhat.
We have reversed the role.
Yeah. See, if you look at it, phygital to digital. Okay, physical was all about capex. Digital is all about opex. Okay, if you look at physical was all about working capital. Now, digital is all about service capital. You as bankers provide loan for working capital. Do you have a loan if a company says, I have got 1,000 employees, I want to train them and make them more productive? Working capital loan is to make business more productive. Will you give loan to such companies?
Great question. And in fact, I had that, question in mind, not exactly that question, but somewhat related, in terms of financing, which I thought Vivek could answer. So perhaps, we'll deflect your question to Vivek. And, in fact, that's the question that, I working as Grameen Foundation, when we work with, entrepreneurs and farmers, farmers example, I'll give you that, you have, these agri loans for farmers for production, right? So, normally for, crop production, there is not a problem of, financing. But the moment, the production is done, then you have a whole value chain around sorting, grading, packaging, processing, branding, transportation, which is done by different value chain actors. And if you look at that entire value chain, there's not enough financing or financing, mechanisms for that. And I see, across different industries, you find the same problem. We don't have the right kind of financing mechanisms. But I think, Vivek, any good inputs on this? Also, for the audience, while we have this interaction with the panelists over the next 5-6 minutes, it'll be great if you can come back to us with your questions through the chat that the panelists can respond to. So please send your questions through the chat, and we'll ask the panelists to address to them. So Vivek, around the financing.
Yeah, so I think what you briefly touched upon, Prabhat, is a very important point, that the whole financing activity needs to move from microfinance to micro equity. And I think there is very early seeds of that thought which are beginning to happen around in that, but very, very early and a very little, if I may say. But I think the important piece is going to be that, because the current models are not suited for tier 2, tier 3, smaller enterprises. And I think, from a financial sense, it makes more sense for this model to evolve. Because today you have large venture backing large enterprises, and the ratio we see in the venture capital as an investor, I can see, is 2 out of 10 succeeding, which means 8 out of 10 are places where you're likely to lose money. And these are large sums of money. But how can we change that model to say, can you finance smaller entrepreneurs? And some of it, Nagesh, is towards what you mentioned, skilling or softer aspects, which are not asset backed. I don't have something that I can kind of underwrite to take that money. So that models are evolving, but I think it is a long way to go. But what is needed is the micro equity model, and like microcredit, I think it is time for us to move to a micro equity model. Because if I'm an investor and I'm willing to put 10 lakhs behind a company, or a crore behind a company where the success is 2 out of 10, how can I break that 1 crore and give it to many, many more people, let's say 1 lakh each to 100 people, 1,000 people, where the chances of success are significantly higher, because these are people who are by and large more committed. But it's a question of the risk. From an entrepreneur perspective, it is very sad that today people are not willing to take a risk in a small scale enterprise, whereas they are willing to take risk in a larger scale enterprise. If I give money to a MSME today and I give him only 25,000 rupees, I ask him for 25,000 papers to sign and guarantees and the works. Whereas if I give a 25,000 crore to a large corporate, and we've seen and heard enough about the processes and the procedures that get followed, and the repayment and the defaults and all of that. So I think my own reading will be movements and thinking towards that have started, but very little and very early. Long way to go. And I keep urging a lot of the people in the investment space that is the model for social impact. And I don't mean NGO, so again, there is a whole debate here, and Prabhat, you and me as part of the Aspire Circle keep talking about this, that social is not equal to NGO or not for profit. Social is any organization. For example, Shoppers Stop that Nagesh set up is a fantastic example, or any other retail chain like that is a fantastic example of social impact that is created, because creating jobs, creating employability, creating monetary benefit, creating training, like he mentioned earlier about customer service associates. And Nagesh may not remember, I had met Nagesh 10-12 years ago, because the whole story, and I remember his own title, as while he may say today that he was the managing director, if you met him 12 years ago, he would not call him himself the managing director, but the customer associate, something,
customer
right?
care associate.
customer care associate. There you go. So that whole industry is creating impact. So I think impact is created in multiple other ways, and people need to start focusing on that. But that's a debate we can have, on a separate day and a separate topic. For today, let's stay focused on youth employability. So I think the models are evolving. They need to evolve faster, and there is a long journey to go there.
Wonderful to hear about that anecdote, Nagesh. Yeah, I mean, really good to hear. So I'll move to a last question on which I would like to kind of briefly touch upon, and then we'll see if there are questions coming from the audience through the chat function. So which is about one is that we are seeing a huge trend from formal employment towards informalization of employment within formal sector. And example of Zomato and delivery is that these are informal self-employment, but within a larger formal sector kind of enterprise. So how does that kind of these kind of opportunities will play out on not just the what kind of skills people require, but also in terms of, say, things like social security or minimum wages, those kind of aspects, how will that get impacted? And secondly, we also have to think about, and I think all of you are passionate about this what we call as 21st century skills, right? Because we are 21 years into 21st century now, and the world has changed so much in these years, and it's that pace of change is going to be even faster tomorrow than it was yesterday. So that's a topic if one of you can touch upon, that'll be great. And finally, if there's any Vivek did touch upon not just youth but different segment, disabled people, LGBTQ women. Of course, there's a full-fledged dedicated panel on the women in workforce right after this session as part of this track. But if there's any remarks one would like to make about women's workforce participation, that'll be great. So Nagesh, yeah.
I just want to give you a quick example of an enterprise that I know has started in Hyderabad called Joy Supermarket. And for the first time, I think I have not seen this happening anywhere, where he has got one person with disability and one woman in the shop. And he is actually giving them equity as associate to run the shop, and say that you are a co-owner of this, and after 6 months or 1 year of training, you can take this and you will be owning 50% of the shop's profits. To me, that's a fantastic model, because it is not only inclusive, but it is a supermarket which is inclusive because it is in a society of 500 stores. The question which we are still struggling is that if that lady has to go and look for loan, okay, where will she get the loan from? She's co-owner of the store. She just become a co-owner of the store. The company which is setting this up is actually a company which is setting up many such stores. Okay, it's inclusive, it's social impact. Okay, but if the individual has to go, where does he go? The second example which comes to your mind is what happened to Ola. See, when Ola started, it was individual drivers. Within 3-4 years, there were a lot of drivers who were having 10-12 cars, which they had taken on loan. And they had almost created a mini business. So I think those opportunities will emerge, but it will also depend on the survival. See, the number of last mile delivery companies which have come in the country. Now we are saying we'll deliver in 10 minutes without asking the customer, do I want my thing in 10 minutes? Okay, this has to stabilize. And once it stabilizes, maybe new roles will come in. But currently, these jobs are still just a job of a gig worker. I don't see a growth opportunity in this. And that's a big challenge that we are going to face.
Thanks, Nagesh. Any additional input from you? Nikita, you want to say something?
Yeah, just building on what Nagesh is saying, I think it's definitely, this whole phenomena of gig work and the platform economy is something that, one needs to sort of see how it evolves. And I think the fact that gig work is sort of a hybrid of, it's neither fully a job and neither is it fully self-employment, right? It's somewhere in between where you're a contractual worker, but you work in some sense at your own sort of, terms and conditions. But at the same time, being a contractual person and you are expected to be available, but at the same time, you don't have access to a lot of the benefits, employee benefits that come with it, right? So I feel like for it to become a thriving sector, and especially when COVID again happened, right? Like if for example, all of us were locked down at home, Ola and Uber's driver didn't have any work to do, right? Because there were no taxis on the road and nobody was hailing taxis. So, and in the absence of these benefits being non-existent for workers like these, like how do they actually survive, right? And how do they then look to grow in spaces like this aspect of the gig work and the platform economy needs to be, I think, a lot more laws and policies have to be built in for growth to exist in spaces like these, especially this sector. And I think we need to be more intentional about how this career pathway is going to evolve for a young person, in terms of if you are starting as an Ola driver, then what's next? Or if you're a Swiggy delivery boy, then what's next? And how do we ensure that there's a safety net built around some of these workers from the point of view of laws and policies? I think that's the other bit that becomes more and more critical. So while I know that right now it doesn't seem like it's going to have a lot of good, but the fact is that there is more and more aggregation happening and more aggregator platforms evolving across sectors, right? Whether you look at food delivery, whether you look at health tech, now whether you look at automobile. So from that perspective, I feel like this sector needs a lot more focus from the government, from the industry, for it to become an important career pathway. So yeah, just wanted to add that bit.
Thanks.
Yeah, if I can add here again, and maybe you may see a pattern in what I'm talking. Again, it's an ecosystem that needs to develop. For example, the question Nagesh was asking earlier about this lady from the Joyous supermarket or similar to that. I think, what is happening today is that a lot of today initiatives, either with state government or with the central government, or sometimes with global, initiatives, the NGOs and the larger organizations exist. There is a problem which exists, but what is missing is somebody to be able to match the two. And I think that is where a lot of the new age innovation will come from. For example, one thing that comes to my mind as a top of the mind activity is a company that I work with as a mentor is the street vendors in the country. And there are crores of street vendors in the country. And there is a government scheme where the government is willing to extend a loan of 10,000 rupees, once repaid 25,000 rupees, once repaid 50,000 rupees. Now, this is available, but the challenge that was being faced today is that a lot of these street vendors have no formal identity. They don't have an Aadhaar card. They don't have quite often a bank account. So they don't exist formally for the world. And here's a company which I work with, which went and created that model, where they created a financial inclusion model, brought them into the system, and now is extending a completely digital format of eKYC and a loan disbursement. So they can today disburse loans to 4,000 or 5,000 people at the drop of a button. Now, models like this will need to emerge for us to really take this to the next level. And I think the other point is that with these emerging technologies or emerging sectors, edtech, fintech, all of these, I think there is a need for us to really look 5-10 years ahead. And quite often, a lot of people today aren't doing that. It is more, let's play it by the year, let's see how things evolve. And I think given the fact that we have a large problem and a large scale that we have to solve that problem at, it will need to put the horse before the cart. It is important that some of us in the industry, leaders, groups, sit down to really plan that, because fintech is here to stay. I think edtech is here to stay. Entertainment, new tech-based entertainment is here to stay. I think every device is today being used for entertainment for multiple hours every single day now. All these are industries which are not going away. And how are we getting prepared for, one, the evolution of these industries, and second, to the skills that are required to match that evolution? So I think those are things that I would think that there is a lot of excitement, there is a lot of technology, there is practically no business which will not have a tech element to it. It may be tech focused, it may be tech enabled, or it may be tech, as the backbone. In some shape, form, or size, it will have tech. So how do